The gymnasium buzzed with the electric energy of anticipation as 12-year-old Marcus Chen pressed himself against the cold concrete wall, watching his classmates receive their annual Awakening Day gifts with mounting dread gnawing at his chest. Each wrapped package represented a family's hope, a tradition stretching back generations, and most importantly, a child's first glimpse into their magical destiny. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor where parents stood in proud clusters, their faces glowing with excitement as they witnessed their children's transformative moment. Marcus's throat tightened as he watched his best friend Jake tear open a shimmering silver box to reveal a crystalline wand that immediately began pulsing with soft blue light, indicating a natural affinity for water magic. The crowd erupted in applause, and Jake's parents rushed forward to embrace their son, tears of joy streaming down their faces. It was a scene Marcus had witnessed dozens of times already this morning, each celebration driving the knife of his own inadequacy deeper into his heart. "Marcus Chen," called Mrs. Holloway, the school's Awakening Day coordinator, her voice cutting through the celebratory noise like a blade. The gymnasium fell silent as hundreds of eyes turned toward him, and Marcus felt his legs transform into lead weights. He had been dreading this moment for weeks, knowing with crushing certainty what would happen next. His name would be called, he would walk to the front of the room, and there would be no gift waiting for him on the ceremonial table. No magical artifact to unlock his dormant powers, no family legacy to claim, no destiny to embrace. The whispers began immediately, rippling through the crowd like wildfire. "Isn't that the Chen boy? Poor thing, his parents couldn't afford a proper awakening gift. I heard his family doesn't even have magical bloodlines. How embarrassing for him." Each word struck Marcus like a physical blow, but he forced himself to walk forward anyway, his sneakers squeaking against the gymnasium floor with each reluctant step. The truth was far more complicated and painful than the gossiping parents could imagine. Marcus's family wasn't poor, his father worked as an engineer at the local power plant, and his mother taught mathematics at the community college. They were comfortable, middle class, and desperately ordinary in a world where magic was everything. The Chen family had no magical heritage, no ancient artifacts passed down through generations, no mystical connections to tap into. They were what the magical community politely called mundanes, people who existed on the periphery of a world they could observe but never truly enter. For 11 generations, every child in their town had received an Awakening Day gift on their 12th birthday, a magical object carefully chosen to match their innate abilities and unlock their potential. Families would spend months preparing, consulting with magical advisors, researching ancestral gifts, and sometimes investing their life savings into finding the perfect artifact for their child. The ceremony wasn't just a tradition, it was a rite of passage that determined a child's entire future, their career prospects, their social standing, and their place in the magical hierarchy that governed their society. Marcus reached the front of the gymnasium and stood before the long table draped in deep purple cloth, where dozens of empty spaces marked the gifts already distributed to his classmates. His spot at the far end of the table was conspicuously bare, just as he had expected. The silence stretched on, becoming more uncomfortable with each passing second. Some parents began shifting nervously, unsure how to handle this unprecedented situation. Children stared with wide eyes, clutching their newly acquired magical items closer to their chests. Mrs. Holloway cleared her throat awkwardly, consulting her clipboard with obvious discomfort. She had been coordinating Awakening Day ceremonies for over 20 years, and this was the first time she had encountered a child without a gift. The protocols simply didn't exist for this situation. "Marcus," she began, her voice gentle but uncertain, "it appears that your family's gift has been delayed?" The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Marcus felt his cheeks burn with humiliation. He wanted to explain that there was no delayed gift, that his parents had agonized over their inability to provide what every other family could offer their child, that they had spent countless sleepless nights researching alternatives and desperately searching for a solution that didn't exist. Instead, he simply nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady if he attempted to speak. His parents, David and Linda Chen, stood at the back of the gymnasium with expressions of quiet devastation etched across their faces. David's hands were clenched into fists at his sides, his ingenious mind futilely trying to solve a problem that couldn't be fixed with logic and determination. Linda had tears threatening to spill over, watching her son endure this public humiliation while feeling utterly powerless to protect him. They had considered dozens of alternatives, purchasing a generic magical item from one of the commercial shops, trying to commission something custom, even attempting to trace their family genealogy back far enough to uncover some forgotten magical connection. Nothing had worked. The magical artifacts that truly mattered, the ones that could unlock a child's potential and set them on their destined path, couldn't be bought or manufactured. They had to choose their wielder, responding to something indefinable in the child's essence, their magical signature, their soul's resonance with the mystical forces that governed their world. For a child without any magical heritage, without even the faintest trace of mystical energy in their bloodline, no artifact would respond. It was an immutable law of magic, as fixed and unchangeable as gravity. Perhaps, Mrs. Holloway suggested with forced optimism, we could schedule a private ceremony later this week when your family's gift arrives? Her tone made it clear that she was offering Marcus an escape from this increasingly uncomfortable situation, a chance to retreat with whatever dignity he could salvage and deal with his disappointment away from the scrutinizing eyes of his peers and their families. Marcus was about to nod and accept this merciful reprieve when the gymnasium's double doors burst open with a thunderous crash that echoed through the cavernous space like a gunshot. Every head in the room whipped around to see a figure silhouetted against the bright morning sunlight streaming through the doorway, their form obscured by the dramatic backlighting. The mysterious stranger paused in the entrance, surveying the scene with an air of someone who had arrived at precisely the right moment, as if their timing had been choreographed by fate itself. As the figure stepped forward into the gymnasium, the assembled crowd got their first clear look at the unexpected visitor. It was an elderly woman, perhaps 70 years old, with silver-white hair that cascaded in waves past her shoulders and eyes that seemed to hold depths of knowledge accumulated over decades of experience. She wore a long coat that appeared to be crafted from midnight blue velvet, its surface shimmering with what looked like tiny embedded stars that caught and reflected the overhead lights. In her weathered hands, she carried a wooden box that seemed unremarkable at first glance, rough-hewn oak with simple brass hinges and a worn leather strap securing the lid. The woman's presence commanded immediate attention, not through any obvious display of power or authority, but through an indefinable quality that made everyone in the room instinctively recognize that they were in the presence of someone significant. She moved with the graceful confidence of someone accustomed to being the most knowledgeable person in any room, her steps purposeful and unhurried as she made her way toward the front of the gymnasium where Marcus still stood frozen in mortification. "Forgive the interruption," the stranger said, her voice carrying easily across the vast space despite speaking at a normal volume. There was a musical quality to her words, an accent that suggested she had traveled extensively and absorbed linguistic influences from many different regions. "I believe I have something that belongs to this young man." Mrs. Holloway blinked in confusion, glancing between the mysterious woman and Marcus, who stood paralyzed with a mixture of hope and terror. The possibility that this could be real, that someone had actually come to rescue him from this nightmare, seemed too good to be true. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Holloway stammered, "but I don't understand. The Chen family didn't arrange for any special delivery, and all registered gifts have already been distributed according to our scheduling system." The elderly woman smiled, an expression that transformed her entire face and revealed laugh lines earned through decades of joy and wonder. "Some gifts," she said with a knowing twinkle in her ancient eyes, "cannot be scheduled or registered through conventional systems. Some must wait for exactly the right moment to reveal themselves." She turned her penetrating gaze directly on Marcus, and he felt as though she could see straight through to his soul, reading every secret fear and desperate hope he had ever harbored. "Marcus Chen," she continued, speaking his name with a reverence that made it sound like an incantation, "descendant of travelers, child of two worlds, bearer of untapped potential that has remained dormant for longer than anyone could have imagined." The gymnasium had fallen into complete silence, with even the smallest children sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary and unprecedented. Parents who had been chatting just moments before now hung on every word, their own gifts and celebrations momentarily forgotten in the face of this mysterious development. Marcus found his voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "I don't understand. My family doesn't have any magical heritage. We've traced our genealogy back 8 generations, and there's no record of anyone with mystical abilities. My parents have consulted with 3 different magical genealogists, and they all confirmed that we're completely mundane." The words tasted bitter in his mouth, each one a reminder of his fundamental inadequacy in a world where magical ability determined everything. The woman's smile deepened, and she took another step closer, close enough now that Marcus could see the intricate embroidery adorning her midnight blue coat, tiny silver threads that formed patterns resembling star charts and constellation maps. "Ah, But that is where the conventional wisdom fails us, dear boy. You see, magical ability doesn't always follow the neat, orderly bloodlines that the genealogists prefer to document. Sometimes it skips generations, lying dormant until the precise moment when it's needed most. Sometimes it emerges in families where it has never been seen before, sprouting like a flower in unexpected soil. She held up the wooden box, and Marcus noticed that despite its humble appearance, there was something compelling about it, something that made it impossible to look away once his eyes had settled on it. More importantly, the woman continued, sometimes the most powerful magic isn't inherited through blood at all. Sometimes it chooses its own vessel, regardless of ancestry or expectation or what society believes to be possible. David Chen stepped forward from the back of the gymnasium, his protective instincts finally overriding his confusion and bewilderment. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the careful politeness of someone trying to navigate an unfamiliar situation without causing offense, "but who are you exactly? And how do you know our son?" His engineering background had trained him to approach problems methodically, to gather data before drawing conclusions, and this entire situation felt like it was operating outside the bounds of logic and reason. The elderly woman turned to face Marcus's parents with the same warm smile she had bestowed on their son. "My name is Evangeline Thorne," she said, offering a slight bow that managed to be both respectful and regal simultaneously. "I am what your people might call a seeker, someone who specializes in finding magical potential in unexpected places, in recognizing gifts that don't fit the conventional patterns that your society has established." She paused, her gaze moving between David and Linda Chen with obvious sympathy for their confusion and concern. "As for how I know your son," Evangeline continued, "I have been watching him for quite some time, waiting for today to arrive. You see, true magical gifts cannot be forced or manufactured on schedule. They reveal themselves when the time is right, when the child is ready, when the universe aligns in precisely the correct configuration." She gestured around the gymnasium, encompassing the entire Awakening Day ceremony with a sweep of her arm. "This tradition of yours, while well-intentioned, operates under the assumption that magic follows predictable timelines and conventional inheritance patterns. But the most extraordinary gifts often refuse to conform to such limitations." Linda Chen stepped forward to join her husband, her mathematics background making her equally uncomfortable with this departure from established patterns and procedures. "But every child receives their gift on their 12th birthday," she protested, her voice tight with the strain of watching her son's pain and confusion. "It's been that way for generations. The magical authorities have confirmed that children who don't receive gifts by their awakening day simply don't possess any mystical abilities." The words came out more sharply than she intended, her maternal instincts making her defensive on Marcus's behalf. Evangeline's expression grew more serious, though her eyes retained their compassionate warmth. "The magical authorities," she said with a slight edge to her voice, "have become quite comfortable with their neat categories and predictable systems. They prefer magic that behaves according to their established rules and documented precedents. But true magic, the kind that can reshape the world and challenge the boundaries of what people believe to be possible, has always been wild, unpredictable, and utterly unconcerned with bureaucratic classifications." She turned back to Marcus, who had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement and a cautious hope that he was afraid to fully embrace. "Your gift, Marcus, is not late or absent. It has simply been waiting for you to need it most desperately, for you to understand viscerally what it means to be different, to feel like an outsider, to experience the pain of not fitting into the world's expectations. Because the power you carry requires empathy, understanding, and the kind of wisdom that can only be earned through genuine struggle." The wooden box in Evangeline's hands began to emit a soft, warm glow that seemed to pulse in rhythm with Marcus's heartbeat. The light was subtle at first, barely noticeable in the bright gymnasium, but it gradually grew stronger until everyone in the room could see it clearly. The assembled crowd gasped collectively, parents pointing and children pressing closer to get a better look at this unprecedented phenomenon. "What you're about to receive," Evangeline said, her voice taking on the formal cadence of ancient ritual, "is not just a magical artifact or a tool to channel mystical energy. This is a responsibility, a calling, a pathway to a destiny that will ask everything of you and offer rewards beyond anything you can currently imagine." She extended the glowing box toward Marcus, but didn't quite hand it to him yet. "The choice must be yours, young man. Once you accept this gift, your life will never be the same. You will face challenges that will test every aspect of your character, and you will be asked to use your abilities in service of others, sometimes at great personal cost to yourself. Marcus stared at the box, his mind reeling with the implications of everything he had just heard. Part of him wondered if this was all some elaborate practical joke, if his classmates had somehow orchestrated this entire scenario to mock his giftless state. But the warmth emanating from the wooden container felt real, and there was something in Evangeline Thorne's ancient eyes that convinced him she was speaking the absolute truth, however impossible it might seem. "What kind of magic?" he asked, his voice stronger now, steadied by curiosity and the first genuine hope he had felt in months. "What would I be able to do?" Around him, his classmates leaned forward eagerly, equally curious about this mysterious gift that had appeared from nowhere to rescue the boy they had all pitied just moments before. Evangeline's smile returned, broader and more radiant than before. "Ah, now that is the most beautiful question of all," she said with obvious delight. "Your gift, Marcus Chen, is the rarest and most precious magic of all, the ability to see and nurture the hidden potential in others, to unlock abilities that have been suppressed or forgotten, to help people discover powers they never knew they possessed." She paused, letting the significance of her words sink in before continuing. "You will be a bridge builder, someone who can connect different types of magic, different kinds of people, different worlds that have grown apart through misunderstanding and fear." The gymnasium had become so quiet that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. The gift Evangeline was describing sounded impossibly wonderful and terrifyingly enormous at the same time. "But why me?" he whispered, voicing the question that had been building in his chest since the moment she had walked through those doors. Why would such an important gift choose someone like me, someone with no magical background, no special training, no preparation for this kind of responsibility? "Because," Evangeline said, her voice gentle but filled with absolute certainty, "those are precisely the qualifications that make you perfect for this calling. Someone raised in magical privilege, surrounded by power and expectation from birth, would never truly understand what it means to feel powerless, to be overlooked, to exist on the margins of society. They would never develop the empathy and compassion necessary to help others who have been dismissed or ignored." She gestured toward the assembled crowd of parents and children, all of whom had been born into magical families and had never questioned their place in the mystical hierarchy. "Your experience as an outsider, your understanding of what it feels like to be different and disconnected, your natural inclination to notice and care about those who are struggling, these are not weaknesses or flaws to overcome. They are the foundation upon which your extraordinary abilities will be built." Evangeline's words rang through the gymnasium with the authority of prophecy, and Marcus felt something deep within his chest begin to unfurl like a flower opening to sunlight. Mrs. Holloway, who had been standing nearby in stunned silence, finally found her voice. "But this is highly irregular," she protested, her bureaucratic instincts rebelling against this deviation from established procedure. "We have protocols to follow, documentation requirements, safety evaluations that must be completed before any child can receive a magical artifact. There are liability issues, insurance considerations, parental consent forms that need to be signed and filed with the proper authorities." Her voice grew more agitated with each word, as if reciting regulations could somehow restore order to this chaotic situation. Evangeline turned to face the flustered coordinator with an expression of patient amusement. "My dear woman," she said with the gentle condescension of someone addressing a child who had missed the point of an important lesson, "the magic I represent predates your bureaucratic systems by several thousand years. True gifts of power answer to laws far older and more fundamental than your paperwork and procedures." She gestured toward the glowing box in her hands. "This artifact has been waiting for Marcus Chen specifically, and it will not be deterred by administrative concerns or regulatory requirements." The light emanating from the wooden container pulsed brighter, as if responding to the discussion of its own nature and purpose. Several parents in the crowd began murmuring among themselves, some expressing excitement at witnessing such an extraordinary event, others voicing concern about the unprecedented nature of what was unfolding before their eyes. The children, however, watched with unabashed fascination, their young minds more open to possibility and wonder than their more cautious adult guardians. Jake Morrison, Marcus's best friend, pushed through the crowd until he stood beside his classmate, still clutching his own newly acquired water wand but clearly more interested in his friend's situation than his own magical awakening. "This is incredible, Marcus," he said, his voice filled with genuine excitement and admiration rather than the pity that had characterized most people's reactions to Marcus's giftless state. "I always knew you were meant for something special, even when you couldn't see it yourself." The simple declaration of friendship and faith meant more to Marcus than all of Evangeline's mystical pronouncements combined. Having someone believe in him, especially someone whose opinion he valued deeply, gave him the courage to take the final step toward accepting whatever destiny was being offered to him. He looked up at Evangeline Thorne, meeting her ancient gaze with newfound determination. "I accept," he said, his voice clear and strong enough to carry throughout the silent gymnasium. "Whatever this gift is, whatever responsibilities come with it, whatever challenges I'll have to face, I'm ready to try." The words felt strange and powerful in his mouth, like speaking an incantation that would reshape the fundamental nature of his existence. Evangeline's face lit up with pure joy, and she finally extended the wooden box completely, placing it gently in Marcus's waiting hands. The moment his fingers made contact with the worn oak surface, the entire gymnasium was flooded with warm, golden light that seemed to emanate from every surface simultaneously. The illumination wasn't harsh or blinding, but rather felt like being embraced by sunlight on the first warm day of spring, comforting and energizing at the same time. Marcus felt a tingling sensation spread up his arms from where his hands touched the box, not painful but intensely present, like electricity dancing along his nerve endings. The sensation continued up his shoulders and across his chest, finally settling in the center of his being with a warmth that felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. For the first time in his life, he felt complete, as if a missing piece of himself had finally clicked into place. The light gradually faded, leaving the gymnasium in its normal illumination, but something fundamental had changed in the atmosphere of the room. Marcus could sense it immediately, a new awareness, a heightened perception that allowed him to see beyond the surface of things. When he looked at his classmates, he could perceive faint auras of colored light surrounding each of them, visual representations of their magical abilities and potential. Jake's water magic appeared as flowing ribbons of blue and silver, while Sarah Chen's earth magic manifested as steady, grounding bands of green and brown. But more remarkably, Marcus could also see the untapped potential in each person, the hidden aspects of their abilities that hadn't yet been discovered or developed. Jake's water magic, he realized, could be expanded to include healing properties if properly trained and focused. Sarah's earth magic had the potential to communicate with plant life in ways that went far beyond simple growth manipulation. Every child in the room had undeveloped facets to their gifts that they had never suspected existed. Even more startling was what Marcus could perceive when he looked at the adults in the room. Many of them had magical abilities that had been suppressed or forgotten over the years, pushed aside by practical concerns and social expectations. Mrs. Holloway, he realized with amazement, had powerful organizational magic that could coordinate and harmonize group efforts in ways that went far beyond simple administrative skills. His own father possessed latent engineering magic that could understand and communicate with mechanical systems on an intuitive level, while his mother had mathematical magic that could perceive the hidden patterns and connections underlying seemingly random events. "What do you see, Marcus?" Evangeline asked softly, her voice filled with the satisfaction of a teacher whose student had just grasped a particularly important lesson. She had stepped back slightly to give him space to process this new level of awareness, but her attention remained focused entirely on his experience and reactions. "Everything," Marcus whispered, overwhelmed by the scope of what his enhanced perception was revealing. "I can see everyone's magic, even people who don't think they have any. I can see the parts of their abilities that they haven't discovered yet, the connections between different types of power, the ways that everyone's gifts could work together if they understood how to combine them properly." His voice grew stronger as he continued to explore this new sense, like a person born blind who was seeing color for the first time. "And what do you feel called to do with this knowledge?" Evangeline prompted gently, guiding him toward the deeper understanding that would define his role as a bridge builder. The wooden box in his hands had stopped glowing externally, but he could feel its continued warmth against his palms, a constant reminder of the responsibility he had accepted. Marcus looked around the room again, his gaze moving from face to face as he processed the incredible diversity of magical potential surrounding him. So many people living far below their true capabilities, unaware of the extraordinary gifts they carried within themselves. So many opportunities for connection and collaboration that were being missed because people couldn't see beyond the conventional categories and limitations that society had imposed on magical practice. "I want to help them," he said, the words emerging from some deep place of certainty within him. "I want to help everyone discover what they are really capable of, help them connect with each other in ways they never imagined possible, help them see that magic is so much bigger and more wonderful than what we've been taught." The vision was crystallizing in his mind as he spoke, a sense of purpose that felt as natural and essential as breathing. Evangeline nodded approvingly, her satisfaction evident in every line of her weathered face. And that, my dear boy, is exactly why this gift chose you. Because you see beyond the artificial boundaries and limitations that have kept the magical community fragmented and diminished. Because your heart naturally reaches out to include rather than exclude, to build bridges rather than walls. She turned to address the entire gymnasium, her voice carrying easily to every corner of the vast space. What you have witnessed here today is not just one young man receiving his magical gift. You have been present at the birth of a new era in your community's relationship with magic itself. Marcus Chen will help you discover abilities you never knew you possessed, connections you never thought possible, potentials you never dared to imagine. The crowd began to stir with excitement and curiosity, parents and children alike beginning to whisper among themselves about the implications of what they had just experienced. The rigid hierarchy of magical society, with its clear categories and predictable progressions, had just been fundamentally challenged by the emergence of someone who could see and nurture hidden potential in everyone. Dr. Peterson, the father of one of Marcus's classmates and a respected member of the local magical council, stepped forward with obvious skepticism written across his face. With all due respect, Ms. Thorne, he said, his tone polite but clearly doubtful, what you're describing sounds too good to be true. Bridge-building magic has been theoretical at best for over a century, and most scholars agree that it may never have existed outside of legend and wishful thinking. How can you expect us to believe that this young man, with no magical training or background, has suddenly manifested abilities that our greatest experts consider to be mythical? Evangeline's smile took on a slightly mischievous quality, like someone who had been waiting for exactly this challenge to arise. An excellent question, Dr. Peterson, she replied, her voice carrying just a hint of the authority that came from decades of experience in magical matters far beyond the scope of local community politics. Perhaps Marcus would be willing to demonstrate his abilities for those who require more concrete proof than simple testimony? All eyes turned to Marcus, who felt a momentary flutter of panic at being asked to perform publicly with abilities he had possessed for less than 5 minutes. But as he looked around the room, his enhanced perception immediately showed him exactly what he needed to do to convince the skeptics while helping someone in the process. His gaze settled on Emma Rodriguez, a quiet girl from his mathematics class who had received a small crystal pendant earlier in the ceremony. The magical assessment had identified her gift as basic light manipulation, a relatively common and not particularly prestigious ability that had left both Emma and her parents somewhat disappointed. But Marcus could see so much more potential in the soft, golden aura surrounding her. Emma, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the gymnasium despite his nervousness, could you come here for a moment? The girl looked surprised to be singled out, glancing nervously at her parents before making her way through the crowd to stand near Marcus and Evangeline. Your pendant, Marcus continued, gesturing toward the small crystal hanging around Emma's neck, it's responding to light magic, but that's only a fraction of what you're capable of. Can you hold it in your hands and focus on it for a moment? Emma nodded uncertainly, lifting the crystal from around her neck and cupping it carefully in her palms. Marcus placed his own hands gently around Emma's, careful not to actually touch the crystal itself but creating a sort of energy bridge between his abilities and hers. Immediately, he could feel the flow of magical potential that had been constrained by conventional expectations and limited understanding. Now, he said softly, instead of just thinking about light, imagine warmth, comfort, healing. Think about how light can chase away not just darkness, but fear, sadness, and pain. The crystal in Emma's hands began to glow more brightly, but the light took on qualities that were entirely different from the simple illumination everyone had expected. The radiance was warm and golden, but it carried with it a sense of peace and comfort that was almost tangible. Several people in the crowd sighed unconsciously, feeling tension they hadn't realized they were carrying begin to melt away under the influence of Emma's enhanced magic. Healing light, Dr. Peterson whispered in amazement, his skepticism evaporating as he witnessed something that shouldn't have been possible according to everything he thought he knew about magical classification. She's manifesting healing light magic, but that requires years of specialized training and a much more powerful magical heritage than basic light manipulation. No, Evangeline corrected gently, her voice filled with the patience of someone who had spent decades trying to expand narrow minds. It requires someone who can see beyond the artificial limitations that your magical education system has imposed on natural abilities. Emma always had this potential within her. Marcus simply helped her access what was already there, waiting to be discovered. Emma stared at the glowing crystal in her hands with wonder and disbelief, feeling for the first time the true scope of the gift she had inherited. The warmth spreading from the pendant felt like a direct connection to something divine, a source of comfort and healing that she could share with anyone who needed it. Tears began streaming down her face, not from sadness but from the overwhelming joy of finally understanding what she was meant to be. "How did you know?" she asked Marcus, her voice choked with emotion. "How could you see what even the magical assessors missed?" The question carried the weight of a lifetime of feeling inadequate and unimportant, of being told that her abilities were minor and unremarkable. Marcus felt his own eyes growing moist as he witnessed the transformation taking place in his classmate. "I could see the light inside you," he said simply, "the part that wanted to heal and help and bring comfort to others. Your magic was never about just creating illumination, it was always about creating hope." The words felt true as he spoke them, drawn from some deep well of understanding that his gift had opened within him. The demonstration had its intended effect on the assembled crowd. Parents began looking at their own children with new curiosity, wondering what hidden potentials might exist beneath the surface of their established magical gifts. Children started examining their own artifacts and abilities with fresh eyes, sensing for the first time that there might be more to their magic than they had been taught to expect. Mrs. Holloway approached Marcus with a mixture of awe and administrative panic. "If what you're suggesting is true," she said, her voice tight with the implications of what she was beginning to understand, "then our entire educational system, a method of magical assessment, our career guidance programs, everything we've built our society around, might need to be fundamentally reconsidered." "Not reconsidered," Marcus replied, his confidence growing as he began to understand the scope of his calling, expanded. "What we have now isn't wrong, it's just incomplete. We've been seeing only a tiny fraction of what's possible, like people who have spent their lives looking at the world through a keyhole and thinking that narrow view represents all of reality." Evangeline nodded approvingly at Marcus's insight. "The existing system has served its purpose," she agreed, "but it was always meant to be a foundation, not a final destination. Marcus represents the next step in your community's magical evolution, the bridge between what has been and what could be." Dr. Peterson, still struggling to reconcile what he had witnessed with his established understanding of magical theory, approached Marcus with obvious fascination. "Young man," he said, his voice carrying the respectful tone he typically reserved for senior members of the Magical Council, "would you be willing to work with our research team to document these abilities? If you can truly help people access hidden aspects of their magical gifts, the implications for our entire field of study are staggering." Before Marcus could respond, his father stepped forward, his protective instincts finally overriding his amazement at the morning's events. "Now wait just a minute," David Chen said firmly, his engineer's pragmatism asserting itself in the face of all this mystical rising. "My son is 12 years old, and 5 minutes ago he was devastated because he thought he had no magical abilities at all. Now you want to turn him into some kind of research subject?" His voice carried the edge of a parent who had watched his child suffer and was determined not to let it happen again. "Dad, it's okay," Marcus said quickly, placing a calming hand on his father's arm. "I understand your concerns, but this feels right. For the first time in my life, I know exactly who I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to do." He paused, looking around at the faces surrounding him, classmates, parents, teachers, and strangers, all looking to him with a mixture of hope and expectation that should have been terrifying but instead felt like coming home. "Besides," he continued with a grin that transformed his entire face, "I don't think this is the kind of gift that can be ignored or hidden away. People need what I can offer, and I need to give it to them. It's not just about magic, it's about helping people become the best versions of themselves." Linda Chen moved to stand beside her husband, her mathematician's mind already beginning to process the logical implications of what their son had become. "If Marcus is going to be taking on this kind of responsibility," she said with the practical authority of someone accustomed to solving complex problems, "then he's going to need proper support, guidance, and protection. This can't just be about research or academic curiosity, it has to be about what's best for our son and the people he'll be helping." Evangeline stepped forward, her ancient eyes twinkling with approval at the Chen family's protective instincts and practical concerns. "Which brings me to the second part of my visit here today," she announced, her words immediately capturing everyone's attention. "Marcus's awakening to his bridge-building abilities is just the beginning of a much larger story. He will need training, guidance, and most importantly, he will need to connect with others who share his calling." She reached into the folds of her midnight blue coat and withdrew a leather-bound envelope sealed with wax that seemed to shift colors in the gymnasium's lighting. This, she said, extending the envelope toward Marcus, is an invitation to attend the Convergence Academy, a school that most people in your community have never heard of because it specializes in training individuals with rare and extraordinary magical gifts. Marcus accepted the envelope with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear but from the magnitude of possibility it represented. The leather felt warm against his fingers, and he could sense that whatever was contained within would change the trajectory of his entire life. A special school? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. There are others like me? Not exactly like you, Evangeline replied with a mysterious smile, because every bridge builder is unique in their specific abilities and approach. But yes, there are others who have been called to serve as connections between different aspects of the magical world, healers of the divisions that have developed over centuries of misunderstanding and fear. She paused, letting the significance of her words settle before continuing. Some can bridge the gap between human magic and nature magic, others can connect the living world with the realm of spirits, and still others can unite different schools of magical thought that have become isolated from each other. The envelope in Marcus's hands seemed to pulse with its own energy, and he could feel the weight of destiny contained within its elegant confines. When would I have to go? He asked, glancing at his parents with concern. The idea of leaving his family and everything familiar was both exciting and terrifying. The academy operates on a flexible schedule, Evangeline explained, clearly understanding his conflicted emotions. Students typically spend 3 months at the school, followed by 3 months at home applying what they've learned in their own communities. It's not about removing you from your support system, but rather about giving you the skills and knowledge you need to serve that system more effectively. Dr. Peterson cleared his throat, his researcher's curiosity getting the better of his social caution. Ms. Thorne, he said carefully, I've been involved in magical education for over 20 years, and I've never heard of this Convergence Academy. Could you provide some more information about the institution's accreditation, faculty credentials, and educational philosophy? Evangeline's laugh was like silver bells chiming in a gentle breeze, musical and warm without being dismissive of his concerns. Dr. Peterson, she replied with obvious amusement, the Academy has been operating for over 300 years, long before your current accreditation systems existed. Our faculty consists of individuals who have mastered abilities that your conventional schools consider to be theoretical at best, and our educational philosophy is based on the radical notion that every person contains far more magical potential than they have ever been taught to access. She gestured around the gymnasium, encompassing not just the assembled crowd but the entire community beyond. Your institutions do excellent work within their defined parameters, she continued, but they are designed to work with known quantities, established abilities, predictable outcomes. The Academy specializes in the unknown, the unprecedented, the impossible made manifest. Marcus had been listening to this exchange while staring at the unopened envelope in his hands, feeling the weight of decision pressing down on him like a physical force. Everything Evangeline was describing sounded incredible, but it also meant stepping into a world completely beyond his experience, taking risks that he couldn't fully calculate or prepare for. Can I have some time to think about it? He asked, looking up from the invitation to meet Evangeline's patient gaze. This is all happening so fast, and I want to make sure I'm making the right choice for the right reasons. Of course, Evangeline replied warmly, her respect for his thoughtfulness evident in her tone. But don't take too long. The Academy's next session begins in 2 weeks, and if you miss this opportunity, you might have to wait another 6 months for the next opening. She paused, her expression growing more serious. More importantly, your community needs what you can offer, and every day you delay is a day that people continue to live far below their true potential. As if summoned by her words, Emma Rodriguez stepped forward again, still clutching her glowing crystal pendant with obvious wonder. Marcus, she said, her voice soft but filled with conviction, whatever you decide about this school, please don't stop helping people like you helped me. I've felt like I was living in black and white my entire life, and you just showed me color for the first time. Her words were echoed by murmurs of agreement from around the room, as parents and children alike began to grasp the implications of Marcus's gift for their own lives and futures. Here was someone who could help them transcend the limitations they had accepted as unchangeable facts, someone who could show them possibilities they had never dared to imagine. Jake Morrison pushed through the crowd again, his water wand still glowing with soft blue light but his attention focused entirely on his best friend's dilemma. Whatever you decide, he said with the fierce loyalty of childhood friendship, I'll support you. But Emma's right, you have something special that people need, and I think you need to share it. Marcus looked around at all the faces surrounding him, his parents, his classmates, his teachers, complete strangers who had been drawn into this extraordinary morning by circumstances none of them could have anticipated. For the first time in his life, he was the center of attention not because of what he lacked, but because of what he could offer. The sensation was both exhilarating and humbling. "I have one more question," he said to Evangeline, his voice growing stronger as he worked through his thoughts aloud. "If I go to this academy and learn to use my abilities properly, will I be able to come back and help everyone here? Will I be able to show other people how to see and develop hidden potential the way you've shown me?" Evangeline's face lit up with pure delight, as if Marcus had just asked exactly the question she had been hoping to hear. "My dear boy," she said with obvious pride, "that is not just possible, it is inevitable. Every bridge builder eventually becomes a teacher, showing others how to recognize and nurture the extraordinary gifts that exist within themselves and those around them." She gestured toward the crowd of people hanging on their every word. "In fact, I suspect that your real education will begin right here, right now, as you start working with the people in your own community to help them discover what they are truly capable of achieving." The truth of her words resonated through Marcus like a bell struck in a cathedral, creating harmonies and overtones that seemed to touch every aspect of his being. This wasn't about choosing between his old life and a new one, it was about expanding his old life to encompass possibilities he had never dreamed existed. The academy would give him tools and knowledge, but his real work would be right here, with the people he had grown up alongside, helping them transform not just their magical abilities but their entire understanding of what it meant to be human in a world filled with wonder. "I don't need time to think about it," Marcus said suddenly, his decision crystallizing with the clarity of absolute certainty. "I accept the invitation to attend the academy, and I want to start working with people here immediately, even before I go away for training." He looked directly at Emma, whose healing light was still flowing gently from her crystal pendant. "Would you be willing to work with me to figure out what else your magic can do? Maybe we can help some other people discover hidden aspects of their gifts while I'm learning how to use mine." Emma nodded eagerly, her face glowing with excitement that had nothing to do with her magical abilities. "I would love that," she said, her voice filled with the enthusiasm of someone who had just discovered their life's purpose. "And I bet there are lots of other people who would want to explore their potential too." Dr. Peterson stepped forward again, but this time his expression was one of genuine respect rather than skepticism. "Marcus," he said formally, "I would like to invite you to present your findings to the Magical Council after you return from your first session at the Academy. If what we've witnessed today represents a genuine breakthrough in magical understanding, it could revolutionize our entire approach to education and community development." Mrs. Holloway, who had been frantically scribbling notes throughout the entire extraordinary morning, looked up from her clipboard with an expression of barely controlled panic mixed with genuine excitement. "This is going to require completely new documentation procedures," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. "How do you file a report about a gift that arrived spontaneously from a mysterious stranger representing an unaccredited institution specializing in impossible magic?" She paused, then looked directly at Marcus with something approaching awe. "But I suppose some things are more important than proper paperwork." The gymnasium had transformed over the course of the morning from a place of celebration for some and humiliation for Marcus into something approaching a revival meeting, with people talking excitedly among themselves about possibilities they had never considered before. Parents were looking at their children with new eyes, wondering what undeveloped potentials might be waiting to be discovered. Children were examining their magical artifacts with fresh curiosity, sensing that there might be far more to their gifts than they had ever been taught to expect. Evangeline surveyed the scene with obvious satisfaction, like an artist stepping back to admire a particularly successful painting. "This," she said to Marcus in a voice pitched low enough that only he could hear, "is how change begins. Not with grand proclamations or official decrees, but with one person helping another discover what they are truly capable of achieving." Marcus nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle into his bones like wisdom gained through years of hard experience rather than minutes of mystical revelation. The wooden box that had contained his gift was still warm in his hands, a constant reminder of the responsibility he had accepted and the journey he was about to undertake. As the official Awakening Day ceremony drew to a close and families began to drift toward the exits, many stopped to speak with Marcus, offering congratulations, asking questions, or simply expressing their amazement at what they had witnessed. Each interaction reinforced his growing understanding of what it meant to be a bridge builder, not just someone who could see hidden potential, but someone who could help others see it in themselves and each other. His parents flanked him as the crowd gradually thinned, their expressions showing a complex mixture of pride, concern, excitement, and protective love. "Are you sure about this academy?" Linda asked quietly, her maternal instincts warring with her recognition of her son's obvious happiness and sense of purpose. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Marcus replied, reaching out to take both his parents' hands in his own. "For the first time, I know exactly who I am and what I'm supposed to do. And I know that whatever challenges come with this gift, I'll be able to handle them because I have you supporting me." David Chen squeezed his son's hand, his ingenue's practical nature finally making peace with the mystical forces that had reshaped their family's destiny in the span of a single morning. "Then we'll figure out how to make it work," he said with the quiet determination of someone who had spent his career solving complex problems. "Whatever you need, whatever support you require, we'll find a way to provide it." As the gymnasium finally emptied except for Marcus, his parents, and Evangeline, the mysterious woman who had changed everything approached them one final time. "Before I go," she said, reaching once again into her coat to withdraw a small silver pendant on a delicate chain, "I have one more gift for you, Marcus. This is a communication stone, attuned specifically to the Academy's network. If you ever need guidance, support, or simply want to share your discoveries with others who will understand their significance, simply hold the pendant and speak your thoughts aloud." Marcus accepted the pendant with the same reverence he had shown the wooden box, understanding instinctively that he was being given more than just a piece of jewelry. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself, for giving me this incredible gift, for showing me that being different isn't something to be ashamed of." Evangeline's smile was radiant as she prepared to leave, her work in their community completed but her connection to Marcus's journey just beginning. "Remember," she said as she walked toward the gymnasium doors, "every person you meet has magic within them, whether they know it or not. Your job is not to convince them of this truth, but simply to help them discover it for themselves." As she reached the doorway, she paused and looked back one final time. "And Marcus," she called across the empty space. "The next time someone tells you that something is impossible, remember this morning and everything that changed because one person was willing to believe in the extraordinary." With that, she stepped through the doors and disappeared into the bright afternoon sunlight, leaving behind a family forever changed and a community on the brink of discovering that magic was far more wonderful and widespread than they had ever dared to imagine. Marcus stood in the center of the empty gymnasium, holding his communication pendant and feeling the warm presence of the wooden box that had started it all, knowing that his real adventure was just beginning.